The sound of blaster fire echoed in the darkened canyon, sharp and unsettling. The alien soldiers, heavily armored and superior in both numbers and technology, moved with ruthless precision, sweeping across the battlefield in a coordinated advance. Their faces, obscured by helmets, betrayed no emotion as they executed their strategies with cold calculation. But there was one thing they had not prepared for. A sudden, thunderous roar shattered the silence of the canyon, as a lone human soldier, just one, stepped forward from behind the craggy rocks. In his hand, he held no advanced weaponry, no laser rifle or plasma cannon. He clutched only a simple, rusted rifle, its surface scratched and worn from years of use. The alien soldiers paused, their sensors detecting no significant threat from the lone human. This was nothing more than an insignificant speck on their radar, a small target for their mighty arsenal. But then, something strange happened. The human soldier didn't take cover. He didn't hesitate. He stood tall, eyes fixed on the advancing aliens, his posture unwavering. A low, guttural cry escaped his throat as he aimed his rifle. The alien forces, sure of their impending victory, snickered behind their helmets. They had faced far worse than this. Human soldiers were no match for their superior technology, their overwhelming firepower. But what they hadn't counted on was the human resolve. The man squeezed the trigger. In an instant, the air was filled with a sharp, blinding flash. The first alien soldier crumpled to the ground, a quiet, almost surreal moment of disbelief hanging in the air. The others didn't even have time to react. Another shot, and another, until the front line of alien soldiers lay motionless in the dirt. The remaining aliens hesitated. A few glanced at each other, their calculated expressions shifting for a fraction of a second. They were trained for battle, programmed to respond to every scenario, every ambush. But nothing in their data banks could have prepared them for this. A human, one man, armed with nothing more than a relic of a weapon from a forgotten age, had torn through their ranks as though they were nothing more than paper targets. This was no ordinary soldier. This was something else. This was something beyond the limits of reason, a force the aliens had underestimated, a force that could not be explained by technology or tactics alone. In the distance, the human soldier, his face grim but resolute, loaded another round into his rifle. The aliens had come to this world with all the confidence of conquerors, believing that their superior weapons and technology would crush anything in their path. But here, against all logic, was humanity, a species known for its unpredictability and raw, untamed power. And now, the alien soldiers realized, with growing panic, that they were not in control. Not anymore. The aliens regrouped, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding in front of them. Their sensors, once perfectly calibrated to detect and counteract any threat, now seemed inadequate against the human anomaly. The remaining soldiers began to communicate in rapid bursts of alien language, their voices strained with disbelief. They had encountered countless species in their quest for galactic domination, but never had they faced anything like this. Far from retreating, the human soldier stood his ground, his rifle now aimed at the remaining alien forces. His face, hardened by years of war, betrayed no fear, only resolve. Behind him, a small band of human soldiers emerged from the shadows, each holding similar weapons, each determined to stand their ground. There was no plan, no grand strategy, only the unwavering will to survive, to protect, and to fight against the invaders who had underestimated them. But how had it come to this? Weeks earlier, on a world far from the battlefield, humanity had been thrust into an impossible situation. The aliens, known as the Xanther, had arrived without warning, their massive warships blocking out the sun, their fleets hovering above every major city. The Xanther were a race of conquerors, ruthless and efficient, with technology far beyond anything humans could comprehend. Their arrival had sparked panic across the planet, and for the first time in history, humanity found itself on the brink of extinction. At first, the humans had fought back with all their might. Governments and military forces scrambled to mount defenses, but their weapons were no match for the alien technology. Cities fell one by one, their defenses shattered by laser beams and plasma bombs. It seemed like the end. But in the chaos, something incredible happened. Humanity didn't give up. Amid the destruction, a small group of soldiers had emerged, not from the ranks of military commanders or generals, but from the everyday people who had refused to surrender. Farmers, mechanics, truck drivers, ordinary men and women who had been thrust into this war with nothing more than their courage and their will to fight. They didn't have the advanced weaponry or sophisticated armor of the Xanther. They didn't have the resources or the experience in interstellar combat. What they had was something far more dangerous, the raw power of the human spirit. The human soldier who had fired the first shot was one of these ordinary men. His name was Jovan, a mechanic from a small town who had been caught in the initial assault. He hadn't been trained for combat, but when the invasion began, he had grabbed whatever weapon he could find and fought back. His natural instincts, sharp, quick, and precise, had kept him alive long enough to become one of the leaders of this resistance. As Jovan and his team made their way through the enemy's front lines, they used unconventional tactics, exploiting the Xanther's overconfidence and technological reliance. The aliens, convinced that their advanced systems could predict every possible human movement, were caught off guard. They had underestimated humanity's ingenuity and resilience. And now, standing on the battlefield, the aliens were beginning to understand the mistake they had made. Jovan's rifle clicked once more, sending another alien soldier crashing to the ground. The remaining Xanther soldiers hesitated, momentarily stunned by the ferocity and skill of this ragtag group. They had come expecting a quick victory, a battle easily won with their superior weapons. Instead, they were fighting a battle they didn't fully understand, a battle they were losing. Behind Jovan, the rest of his team fought with equal tenacity. Each of them had a unique story, a reason to keep fighting. Jeanne, once a schoolteacher, had lost her family in the initial attack. Now, she wielded a heavy plasma cannon with precision, taking down enemy craft with ease. Cade, a former truck driver, was a master of strategy, using the terrain to his advantage and ensuring that every shot counted. Together, they formed a team unlike anything the Xanther had ever encountered. As the battle raged on, the Xanther forces began to regroup, but their confidence was gone. They no longer believed in their superiority. Every time they attempted to advance, a human soldier would appear, taking down 1, 2, sometimes 3 of them in quick succession. They had underestimated humanity's power. And that was a mistake they couldn't afford to make again. Jovan's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the battlefield. The aliens were retreating. Not in full, but in a way that showed fear, something they hadn't felt before. They were realizing that they were not dealing with an inferior species. They were facing an adversary capable of fighting back with strength, intelligence, and a deep-seated will to survive. And this was only the beginning. As the Xanther retreated, their movements were uncoordinated, their once confident formation crumbling. Jovan stood at the forefront, his breath heavy as the dust of the battlefield swirled around him. His eyes scanned the horizon, watching as the alien forces regrouped, but they didn't seem as certain anymore. The battle wasn't over, not yet. But something had shifted in the air, something palpable. The human soldiers had only one thing in mind: survival. Jovan's thoughts drifted for a moment as he watched his team. They were exhausted, bloodied, and bruised, but they were standing tall, unwavering. These were the people who had once lived ordinary lives, far removed from the horrors of war. Now, they were more than just survivors, they were warriors, and their strength was drawn not from weapons or advanced technology, but from something far more powerful. Their will to protect what was theirs. Behind him, Jeanne fired her plasma cannon once more, sending a blast that obliterated an enemy drone in mid-flight. Cade, ever the strategist, had begun to position the remaining human forces into makeshift defenses, using wreckage and debris to shield their soldiers from the aliens' increasingly erratic fire. Each member of the team worked with an unspoken understanding, their bond stronger than any formal training could ever instill. Despite their success, Jovan knew that the battle was far from over. The Xanther were not going to retreat forever. They had powerful weapons, advanced ships that could bombard the planet from orbit, and the sheer numbers to overwhelm any resistance. What the humans had was grit, determination, and an ability to adapt, qualities that had already proven invaluable. But as the dust settled on the battlefield, a moment of quiet swept over the group. The sudden stillness was almost unnerving after the chaos of combat. It felt as though the world was holding its breath. "This isn't over," Cade said, his voice steady despite the strain. "They'll come back with reinforcements." Jovan nodded. He had already anticipated that. The Xanther would not stop until they had wiped out every last resistance fighter. But in their attempt to crush humanity, they had overlooked one crucial fact: humans would never go down without a fight. "What's next?" Jeanne asked, wiping the sweat from her brow, her voice a little strained. She had been fighting for hours, but there was no sign of stopping. "We can't keep running on empty. We need a plan." Jovan's gaze shifted to the horizon. He had been thinking about that, too. The first victory had been a shock, not just to the aliens, but to the humans as well. But a victory in one battle wouldn't be enough. They needed to keep the pressure on, hit the aliens where it hurt, and force them to think twice about their invasion. "We hit their command center," Jovan said, his voice cold and determined. "It's their only chance to regroup. If we can take it down, we might just win this war." The others nodded, their faces set with resolve. They didn't question him. They knew this was their only shot. If they could strike the heart of the alien force, disrupt their operations, and show the Xanther that humanity would never surrender, then maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide of this war. But Jovan couldn't ignore the feeling in the pit of his stomach. He knew the Xanther wouldn't give up easily. Their technology was far more advanced, their ships were equipped with weapons that could wipe out entire cities with one blast. But Jovan had already seen that even the most advanced technology had its limits when it faced human ingenuity. And in this war, it was humanity's sheer unpredictability that was its greatest weapon. With the sun beginning to set, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Jovan gathered his team together. They were a small force, but they had something far more dangerous than the aliens could ever understand: each other. They had the raw power of their determination, the strength of their unity, and a will that refused to break. This would be their advantage. "We move out at dawn," Jovan ordered, his voice steady. "We strike hard, fast, and without mercy. We take their command center, or we die trying." The team nodded once more, each member steeling themselves for the battle ahead. They had seen the horrors of war, had felt the sting of loss, but they had also felt the unshakable fire that burned within them. The fire that drove them to keep fighting, to never give up, even in the face of certain destruction. As they prepared for the next step in their fight, Jovan allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The aliens had underestimated humanity, had seen them as little more than an obstacle. But the truth was, the Xanther had no idea what they were up against. They had come to conquer the galaxy, but they were about to learn the most important lesson of all: never underestimate the power of a species that had survived against all odds. And humanity, for all its flaws, was a force unlike any the universe had ever seen. The night was heavy with anticipation as Jovan's team moved under the cover of darkness. The plan was simple: hit the alien command center fast and hard, disrupt their operations, and force them to retreat. There was no time for hesitation, no room for mistakes. Every second counted, and every decision would carry the weight of their survival. The team moved in silence, their footsteps muffled by the barren landscape. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the wreckage that littered the terrain. The remains of the alien ships were scattered across the ground, twisted metal and debris, remnants of humanity's last stand. Each piece of wreckage was a reminder of the battles they had fought, the losses they had endured. But it was also a testament to their survival, to their refusal to bow down to the alien invaders. As they neared the outskirts of the alien stronghold, the tension was palpable. Jeanne, with her plasma cannon slung over her shoulder, kept a watchful eye on the surrounding area. Cade, always the strategist, had already scouted the route, ensuring that there would be no surprises. Jovan, leading the group, kept his focus on the task ahead. He knew the risks, this wasn't going to be an easy fight. But he also knew that it was their only chance to win. They reached the outer perimeter of the command center without incident. The Xanther soldiers, though formidable, had not expected such a small human resistance to dare challenge them so directly. The aliens had become complacent, thinking they had crushed humanity's will to fight. But Jovan's team was proof that they had underestimated their enemy. "This is it," Jovan whispered, turning to his team. "We breach the gate and take out their communications. If we do this right, they won't be able to coordinate a response." Jeanne nodded, checking her cannon one last time. "Let's make it count." Cade positioned himself at the front, directing the others with quick hand gestures. The plan was to infiltrate the base, disable their communication systems, and leave before the Xanther realized what had happened. The element of surprise was their greatest weapon. With a swift movement, Cade activated a small device that sent a signal to disable the outer security cameras. The rest of the team moved in quickly, their steps swift but careful, avoiding detection. They reached the massive steel gates of the command center, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, without warning, the gates exploded open, the sound of the blast reverberating across the compound. The humans had been ready. They rushed in, catching the alien guards off guard, their shock turning into frantic attempts to regroup. Jovan's rifle rang out, each shot calculated and precise, knocking out one guard after another. The aliens fought back with their advanced weapons, but they were disorganized, rattled by the speed and ferocity of the human attack. Jeanne's plasma cannon tore through the alien defenses, while Cade laid down suppressive fire, ensuring no one could escape. The humans moved swiftly, clearing out the entrance and pushing deeper into the command center. There was no time to savor their initial success. They had to keep pushing forward, reach the heart of the alien operation, and strike before reinforcements could arrive. But even as the humans advanced, the aliens began to regroup. Their response was swift, and soon, the base was alive with the whine of alien weaponry and the thrum of their ships lifting off into the air. The Xanther, though shaken, had not given up. Their machines of war were coming for the humans. "We need to hurry," Jeanne shouted, taking cover behind a steel pillar as an alien energy blast scorched the ground nearby. The command center was becoming a war zone, with humans and aliens locked in a deadly dance, each side fighting for control. Jovan could feel the pressure mounting. The Xanther were not giving up without a fight, and with every passing second, the chances of completing their mission grew slimmer. But they had come this far. There was no turning back now. "Stay focused," Jovan barked. "We've got one shot at this. Get to the communications hub, and shut it down." They pressed on, cutting through the alien forces with relentless determination. Finally, they reached the core of the command center. The communications hub stood before them, a massive console lined with alien technology. Jeanne and Cade worked quickly, planting explosives around the core. Jovan stood guard, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of incoming enemies. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was it. If they could destroy the communications hub, they could stop the alien forces from coordinating their attacks. It would give humanity a fighting chance. Just as the last explosive charge was set, the ground trembled. The doors to the command center burst open, and a squad of elite Xanther soldiers charged in, their weapons blazing. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned. But the humans didn't retreat. Jovan raised his rifle, steadying his aim. With a single shot, the first alien soldier fell. Jeanne fired her cannon, blowing apart another. Cade dropped to a knee, using the last of their ammunition to take down the remaining enemies. The countdown had begun. 3 seconds, Cade said, his voice grim but determined. Jovan glanced back one last time at the team, then at the device in his hands. The last of the alien soldiers had fallen. They had done it. The Xanther were no longer a threat. The explosion was deafening, and the command center shook as the communications hub was destroyed. The blast was a beacon of hope for humanity. The Xanther had been dealt a crippling blow. But as the smoke cleared, Jovan knew one thing for certain. This victory was only the beginning. The dust from the explosion still lingered in the air, and the aftermath of the blast echoed through the command center like a distant thunderclap. Jovan stood, his chest heaving with exertion, as he surveyed the wreckage around him. The alien communications hub had been destroyed, and with it, the Xanthers' ability to coordinate their forces. For the first time since the invasion began, humanity had struck a decisive blow. But as the adrenaline began to fade, reality set in. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Xanther would not simply walk away. They would retaliate. They would learn from their mistakes, adapt, and come back stronger. Jovan wiped the sweat from his brow and turned to his team. Jeanne, Cade, and the others were already moving, making sure the area was secure. There was no time to rest. The longer they stayed, the more likely it was that reinforcements would arrive. They had to move, and they had to move fast. "We can't stay here," Cade said, his voice tense. "The Xanther will regroup, and when they do, they'll come down on us with everything they've got." Jovan nodded. The mission had been a success, but the danger wasn't over. The Xanther might be disoriented, but they were not easily beaten. They had technology far beyond anything humanity could fathom. Their weapons, their ships, their tactics, they were all superior. But what the Xanther hadn't counted on was humanity's refusal to give up, its capacity to fight back with everything it had. "We'll take a different route out," Jovan said. "Head for the eastern ridge. We'll move in small groups and keep low. The last thing we need is to be spotted by a patrol." The team fell into line, moving with quiet determination. The sound of distant gunfire echoed through the compound, a reminder that the war was still raging outside. Every corner, every dark alleyway could hide an enemy, and the humans had no illusions about the dangers they still faced. They were a small force, but their resolve was unbreakable. As they moved through the abandoned halls of the command center, Jovan's thoughts kept returning to the same thing. The Xanther had underestimated humanity from the start. They thought the humans were weak, that their technology was primitive, that their will to fight was easily crushed. But the humans had proven them wrong. Jovan remembered the first day of the invasion, the fear, the uncertainty, the chaos. The alien forces had descended on Earth like a storm, tearing through cities, wiping out entire populations. But humanity had fought back, inch by inch, person by person. Ordinary men and women, driven by the need to survive, had become warriors. And as the days passed, that fear had turned into something else: anger, determination, and a deep-seated desire to protect their world. It was that fire, that raw, untamed power, that the Xanther hadn't seen coming. They had thought their superior technology would be enough to crush humanity. But it wasn't. The humans had adapted, using their surroundings, their ingenuity, and their spirit to fight back in ways that the Xanther could never have predicted. As they reached the eastern ridge, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. It was a quiet, almost peaceful moment, in stark contrast to the chaos of the previous hours. But even as the sun rose, Jovan knew they couldn't afford to relax. The Xanther were regrouping, and it wouldn't be long before they were back in full force. "We need to contact the rest of the resistance," Jean said, pulling out a makeshift communicator. "Let them know what happened here." Jovan nodded. The resistance had been fractured, scattered across the planet, but every victory, every bit of intel, brought them closer to uniting. If they could rally together, if they could bring the full weight of humanity's determination to bear, then maybe, just maybe, they could win this war. The communication device crackled to life, a faint signal cutting through the static. It was a small victory, a sign that the resistance was still fighting, still standing. But there was no time for celebration. "We've got more work to do," Jovan said, his voice steady. "We've won a battle, but the war isn't over. The Xanther will come again. And when they do, we'll be ready." Cade gave a grim smile, tightening his grip on his weapon. "They've never faced anything like us." The team nodded, their eyes burning with the same determination. They had seen what the Xanther were capable of, and they knew the fight would be long and hard. But they also knew that humanity had something the Xanther would never understand, the will to fight, no matter the odds, no matter the cost. As they moved forward, the sun rising behind them, Jovan couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. It was a hope born not from technology or advanced weaponry, but from something far deeper. It was a hope born from the heart of humanity itself. And that, he knew, was what truly made humanity dangerous. The human resistance had been given a brief respite, but Jovan knew the enemy wasn't far behind. They had destroyed the alien communications hub, but that victory had only slowed the Xanther down. Now, as they moved through the rugged terrain, the weight of what lay ahead pressed on Jovan's shoulders. The enemy would regroup, adapt, and strike again. But humanity had done the unthinkable, they had fought back. And they would continue to fight, no matter the cost. As the team pressed onward, they moved with purpose, each step taking them deeper into enemy territory. The first light of dawn had long since passed, and now the world around them was bathed in the harsh light of midday. The landscape was barren, littered with the remnants of the war, torn-up earth, burned trees, and the twisted wreckage of alien ships scattered like broken toys across the field. The Xanther had come in with all their might, but the humans had made them pay dearly for every inch of ground. Cade led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. Jean followed close behind, her plasma cannon ready, while the others remained alert, moving in tight formation. They were a small group, but they were tight-knit, forged in the heat of battle. Each soldier trusted the others with their life. "We're close," Cade muttered, his voice low. "The alien reinforcements are on the move. We need to find shelter before they catch up." Jovan nodded. He had been expecting this. The Xanther were relentless, and after the strike on their command center, they would send everything they had to crush the human resistance. But Jovan wasn't worried about the Xanther's strength or firepower. He was worried about time. Every minute they spent out in the open was another minute the Xanther could use to set up an ambush, call in reinforcements, or track their movements. "We'll find a place to hold up," Jovan said, his voice steady. "Jean, take the rear. Cade, scout ahead. The rest of us will move in between." They fell into their positions, moving with practiced precision. The pressure was mounting, but they couldn't afford to let fear take over. There was too much at stake. Too many lives were hanging in the balance. And though the fight had already been brutal, Jovan knew that the hardest battles were still to come. The team moved quickly, crossing the desolate battlefield with little cover. They passed the charred remains of alien warships, their once gleaming surfaces now blackened and twisted from the humans' guerrilla attacks. The sight was a reminder of how far they had come, how much they had already sacrificed. The Xanther might have had advanced technology, but humanity had learned to turn their weaknesses into strengths. Minutes passed, and Jovan could feel the tension in the air. Every sound seemed amplified, every movement suspect. Then, as they approached a cluster of jagged rocks, Cade signaled for them to stop. His eyes narrowed, and he motioned for them to crouch low. "Something's wrong," he whispered. "The Xanthar are close. Too close." Joven's pulse quickened, and he glanced around. The terrain was rugged, but there were too many open spaces, too few places to hide. If the aliens had sent patrols to track their movements, they were at a severe disadvantage. "We need to get to cover, now," Joven ordered. He didn't wait for a response. He led the team toward a narrow canyon that cut through the rocky landscape. The sharp walls of stone would offer shelter and give them a chance to regroup. The team moved fast, adrenaline kicking in as they darted from one patch of cover to the next. Joven could hear the distant hum of alien ships overhead, their engines low and menacing. He knew they didn't have much time. If they couldn't find a way to escape, they would be surrounded. As they reached the canyon, the sound of alien footfalls reached their ears, and the hair on the back of Joven's neck stood up. The Xanthar had found them. "Positions!" Joven shouted. The team scrambled into the canyon, taking up defensive positions behind rocks and jagged stone formations. Jeanne set up her plasma cannon, while Cade and the others readied their weapons. They had no time to strategize. They had only moments to prepare for what was coming. Then, without warning, the Xanthar appeared, emerging from the shadows with a force so overwhelming that it nearly shook the ground. There were dozens of them, their advanced armor glinting in the sun, their weapons trained on the human soldiers. But this time, there were no surprises. The Xanthar were ready for them. Joven's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind was clear. They had one chance. One moment to make this work. The first shots rang out, and the canyon erupted in chaos. Joven's rifle fired without hesitation, each shot landing with deadly precision. The Xanthar soldiers returned fire, their energy blasts cutting through the air like knives. The humans ducked behind cover, their strategy one of endurance. They couldn't match the Xanthar's firepower, but they could outlast them. They could take advantage of their terrain, their speed, and their unpredictability. Jeanne's plasma cannon roared to life, sending a bolt of searing energy into the enemy's line, sending 2 soldiers flying. The Xanthar faltered, but they didn't stop. They pressed forward, relentless, determined to crush the human resistance once and for all. But the humans weren't giving up. Joven stood tall, his mind calculating every move, every shot, every second. He could feel the weight of the battle, the danger of their situation. But he could also feel something else, hope. In the face of overwhelming odds, in the face of destruction, humanity had risen. And they would rise again. The battle raged on, but one thing was clear, the Xanthar would never truly understand what they were up against. Not until it was too late. The sounds of battle faded into the background, the clash of weapons and explosions turning into a dull hum in Joven's ears. His team had held their ground as long as they could, but the alien forces were relentless, pressing harder with every passing minute. The humans, outnumbered and outgunned, had fought for survival, but survival wasn't enough. Victory had to be more than just surviving, it had to be about proving that humanity could stand tall, no matter the odds. Joven crouched behind a large rock, his chest rising and falling with each labored breath. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from the sheer weight of the moment. They had given everything, and still, the aliens were relentless, their assault unwavering. The future of humanity hung in the balance. But just as the Xanthar forces seemed poised for their final push, something changed. From the depths of the canyon, there was a distant roar, a sound that made every human soldier pause. At first, they thought it was just the wind, or maybe an echo from the battle. But then it came again, louder this time, unmistakable. The ground began to shake, as if the earth itself was coming alive. "What the hell is that?" Cade asked, his voice laced with confusion. Jeanne looked up, her eyes wide in disbelief. It's them. They're coming. And then, from the distance, humanity's last hope appeared. A wave of human reinforcements, not just from one location but from across the globe. The Xanther had underestimated the strength of humanity's unity. They had thought their invasion would break them, but they had underestimated the power of people who refused to back down, who were willing to fight for each other, for their families, for their homes. As the reinforcements arrived, Jovan stood taller, his heart swelling with pride. The first wave of soldiers was led by survivors of the initial battles, people who had fought and lost everything but had refused to give up. Behind them came others, resistance fighters, former soldiers, ordinary men and women who had been dragged into the war by necessity but had discovered something extraordinary within themselves. The Xanther forces faltered for the first time. They hesitated, unsure of how to handle the sudden surge of human soldiers. For the first time, they weren't just facing individuals, they were facing an entire united world, a force made stronger by its people's unbreakable resolve. Jovan turned to his team, his face filled with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in weeks. Hope. They've made a mistake, he said quietly. They thought we were weak. They thought we couldn't fight back. But we've shown them what it means to be human. The human forces surged forward, their weapons trained on the retreating Xanther. There was no more fear in their hearts, only the determination to see this fight through to the end. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their future, for the future of every person who had ever believed in the power of the human spirit. As the alien forces began to retreat, Jovan stood tall, watching as they fled, their ships lifting off from the planet's surface. It wasn't the way they had imagined victory, there were no grand speeches, no massive celebrations. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that humanity had stood together, fought together, and had shown that they were more than capable of defending their home. In that moment, Jovan understood something profound. The true strength of humanity wasn't in its technology, its weapons, or its military strategies. It was in its will to fight, to stand up when everything seemed lost, and to never give up. It was in the hearts of people who refused to accept defeat, no matter the odds. The battle was over. The aliens had learned their lesson the hard way. Humanity was not a species to be trifled with. They were a force that could withstand anything, as long as they stood together. As Jovan looked out over the battlefield, he knew one thing for certain, the Xanther would never return. And if they did, humanity would be ready. Because in the end, it wasn't advanced technology, powerful weapons, or military might that made humanity dangerous. It was the raw power of the human spirit. And that, Jovan realized, was something no enemy could ever defeat.